Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Scherer, member.
This month's SBE Webxtra is brought to you by Wheatstone, maker of the intelligent IP audio network used by studios around the globe. The AES-67 compatible WheatNet IP intelligent network is the most comprehensive end-to-end studio network system in the world, with a full line of consoles, software apps, IP audio appliances, and third-party add-ons for any studio workflow, size, or purpose. Wheatstone.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Scherer, Member Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers and the co-host of this month's episode of the SBE Webxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly SBE meeting that's usually held on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals with about 5,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. The host of today's SBE Webxtra is SBE Board member Kirk Harnack, who is also the chair of the SBE Social Networking Committee. Hi, Kirk.
Hey, Chris. Good afternoon, and hello to everyone who's watching live, or if you're watching the playback of this program on YouTube. We're glad to have you along, and we're going to cover a pretty interesting topic today with our guest, Kevin Trueblood, so hang on for that. Meanwhile, Chris, what do you got for us?
Well, we've got your SBE member update for March 16th, 2020. By now, you've heard that the NAB has canceled the NAB show for April. And just this morning, I saw reports that hotels in the Las Vegas Strip are closing business as well to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 coronavirus. Naturally, the SBE events that were planned for Las Vegas, including the NS Workshop and the SBE at PBS TechCon, are canceled as well. The SBE will work with the NAB and our other partners if the convention is rescheduled. In the meantime, we hope you observe the recommendations on preventing the spread of the virus. Kirk, Kevin, and I are doing that today since we're all connecting to today's SBE Webxtra remotely. On the webinars by SBE front, we have several on the calendar ahead of us. March 24, 2020, we have AOIP Series Module 2, the AOIP Basics. This webinar provides an entry-level understanding of the concept of what audio over IP is and how it can be utilized in a modern facility. On April 29, we have AOIP Series Module 3, how AES-67 builds on 15 years of AOIP success. Despite more than 10,000 audio over IP-based audio consoles working today and more than 500,000 AOIP streams in operation at any given time, some aspects of AOIP remain mysterious. You'll learn more about that in the webinar. And on May 14, we have the 2020 RF Safety Course. Stephen Lockwood, Senior Engineer and Partner with Hatfield and Dawson Consulting Engineers, presents this popular SBE course, which provides an updated overview of RF radiation issues and practical practices for broadcast to sbe.org/webinars. Looking further into 2020, the SBE will again present the Leadership Development Course, August 4 to 6 in Atlanta. You can learn more and register to attend at sbe.org/LDC. The SBE has presented the course since 1997. Rodney Vandeveer, a professor of organization, leadership, and supervision at Purdue University, brings more than 30 years of industrial and business experience and management positions in human resources, training and development, and manufacturing. On the certification side, if you'd like to take an SBE certification exam, here are some dates to keep in mind. The next local exam window will be held at Chapters the week of June 5. The application deadline for that is April 17. And if a local chapter exam is not convenient for you, private proctoring is available. Contact the SBE National Office for details. For more on SBE certification, go to sbe.org/certification. The SBE mailed dues renewal notices in January. You should have received yours by now, we hope. If not, you can renew online at the SBE website, sbe.org. SBE membership for the year begins on April 1, but don't wait until the last minute to renew, or you might risk losing your member benefits. And that is your SBE member update for March 16, 2020.
The next one, March 24th, our guest, Kevin Trueblood, is the teacher for that.
I believe you are correct. That's right.
Yeah. And then the next month in April, I get to teach that one. So
Bone. Oh, yes, that's right. That's right. It's you.
Well, why don't we go ahead and bring our guest in, Kevin Trueblood. Kevin, with the SBE, as he volunteers, as most of us do. He is the he's the chairman of the Government Relations Committee. Kevin, welcome into SBE Webxtra.
Hey, Kirk, how you doing? It's good to see you.
I'm good. I didn't know you were involved in so many ways with SBE. I just now realized when I looked it up while Chris was announcing it, I thought, well, who's teaching the next webinar? And it's you. It's about AOIP basics. Yeah?
Yeah, so that's basically providing a kind of a fundamental understanding for people that don't have AOIP systems or they're just entering broadcast engineering. It's basically, here's what it is, here's how you can use it. So it's a very fundamental beginning to what AOIP is. And then actually you're coming in with an even better one after that to kind of build on that. So it's kind of neat that we've got this series coming out.
There are a lot of stations using AOIP, and there are plenty of stations and engineers who are not, and it's gotten to be, it's no longer a science experiment. 15 years ago it was a little bit of a, well, you want to put your toe in this or not, and now there's probably 20,000 AOIP consoles out in the world, not even including all the semi-pro consoles that are using Dante and things like that. So yeah, good topic for all of us engineers to be up on, and if you're not on it, this will be a couple of great webinars to do. But that's not why we're here today. And welcome into this SBE WEBxtra. Kevin Trueblood, as chair of the Government Relations Committee, is here to talk to us about a filing that the SBE made to the FCC concerning digital AM and part of the revitalization of AM. And wherever you stand on that, or have hope for it, or just it's a pipe dream, or you think, yeah, there's things we could really do, this filing that we made is pretty interesting. And Kevin is going to be here to hit the highlights of this filing and tell us why it's important and why engineers should be knowledgeable about this. So Kevin, what the filing was in response to the commission seeking comments about something. Kind of set this up for us.
Yeah, so the FCC has continuously over the last several years been focused on AM revitalization, and a lot of stations have benefited from this. We've seen translators that have come on the air. We've seen power levels get increased. We've seen the ratchet rule go away. So there's been a lot of effort to improve the AM band and help make it more viable as we look at the media landscape in 2020 and what has been kind of an erosion of AM listenership on a number of fronts for a number of reasons. But in large part, we're looking at the technical aspect of it, and in particular, a lot of the challenges that AM operators face in 2020 that have really challenged the band. Most notably, and this is what the filing this most recent filing discusses, is a lot of the rise in interference and noise level that the band has been suffering. It hasn't gotten any better. And these are comments that we've made multiple times as the FCC has first taken a look at this revitalization. We've filed comments over the years a couple of times, largely saying many of the same things, that we support the FCC's initiatives, that we agree that these are great ideas, and we're open to all of this. However, there's an underlying problem that the FCC refuses to address, which is Part 15 and Part 18 interference.
I noticed that the filing, which is, if you print it out, which I have here, is a number of pages long. This is available on the SBE's website because it was filed. Comments from the Society of Broadcast Engineers Incorporated. Our attorney, Chris Imlay, filed these, and this Kevin was reviewed by the SBE Executive Committee before it got filed, right? So this really is our feeling about this thing.
Yes, it is. Well, what happened was back in January, the executive committee basically authorized Chris to make comments on behalf of the SBE to start drafting things. And that's what Chris did, is he drafted those comments. And then once he was complete, he submitted it to the Government Relations Committee, which is made up of myself as the chair, plus the rest of the executive committee. So there's a lot of great minds that are on here and a lot of people that have different stakes in the broadcast industry. And we all basically gave our stamp of approval as Chris wrote these. So what is there is what largely Chris Imlay's words as authorized to say on everyone's behalf, including the organization.
In this filing, Chris kind of hits a couple of different topics, and the key topic here is about digital AM. And so I want to read, I'm just going to read out the first couple of sentences here that I think hit the meat of the matter. The SBE filing to the FCC says, it is gratifying that the Commission is faithfully continuing the effort commenced in this proceeding almost 7 years ago to enable AM broadcasters to survive economically and to better serve the public, thereby advancing the Commission's fundamental goals of localism, competition, and diversity in broadcast media. SBE favors the instant proposal to permit, but not require, all AM stations to operate in full digital mode. Now, I guess we should talk about a couple of the technicalities that AM stations can do. I remember when the whole Ubiquity rollout happened, and a number of AM stations as well as a number of FM stations went to HD radio, as it's called now, and a lot of AM stations tried it and then dropped it. I'm sure there are still some AM stations doing it. And by the way, my own experience as a consumer receiving AM stations that were transmitting in HD, the small experience that I had was actually really good. I was surprised, but it depended upon the station doing a lot of things right for it to work. And this was the hybrid mode where your receiver would pick up an AM station, and if the HD was there and the data was good, it would roll over, blend over to the HD. And I got to tell you, the best experience I had was actually in St. Louis, Missouri. I was visiting a station, KFUO, in St. Louis, Missouri. It's a non-commercial religious station. And my radio flipped over to the HD while I was yakking on the phone. And when I got done on the phone, my brain went, huh? I don't remember tuning to an FM station. And I listened for a minute and realized, whoa, that's AM HD. And look, as engineers, I mean, I'm an audiophile. I know it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to make my brain think, you switched to an FM station. So there's audio promise in HD that, given all the other constraints and difficulties we have with an analog AM, we actually can see some improvement. And that's an improvement in audio. But this all digital AM is also an option for another reason. So first of all, Kevin, if you could, tell us about all digital AM and how it's different than the hybrid mode, some of the pros and cons of that. And then we'll get into about coverage and how all digital AM may help a little bit to overcome man-made interference. Let's talk about these modes. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's somebody that could probably explain a lot better than I could, but you know, what ended up happening is with the hybrid mode, I think a lot of broadcasters got basically frustrated with a lot of the technical challenges of operating a hybrid digital AM station. When we talk about a hybrid digital AM station, that's much like the FM, where you have both an analog and a digital carrier. And on AM, there's obviously a lot more constraints involved in broadcasting that signal and just in the engineering part of it. You know, with FM, it's like you can pump that out of one box, put it into the antenna, and you're done, which you can do on AM, but then you have the tuning cabinet and all this other stuff involved. So there's a lot more technical challenges to making it work correctly. Now, when we move to the proposal that's in front of us is to move to all digital broadcast, which means you eliminate the analog carrier and you put all digital solely on that carrier on the AM band. So there is no analog signal. If you scan to it with an analog tuner, you're just going to not hear anything but noise. It's not going to be anything discernible to you. But if you have a digital tuner, you're going to hear what is basically an expanded digital signal that basically is allowed to breathe a little bit. I mean, there's one station right now that is doing it full time, and that's the one that's in Washington, D.C., owned by Hubbard. They've put a music format on it that's very eclectic and actually kind of cool. I got the chance to listen to it back in September. And what we've seen with a lot of these all digital AM tests is it's able to better perform of interference issues. So you're able to put out a weaker signal, a smaller signal, but still cover a great deal of area and overcome a lot of issues. But it's still AM. It's still it's still the nature of that broadcast signal, but it's able to kind of give and take a little bit more for the end consumer because there's just that much more to work with. So you're able to get a marginal signal. It'll give you kind of a reduced quality, but it's still better than AM and what you can get. But if you get a full digital signal, it sounds fantastic. It sounds just as good, if not better than FM.
So thinking about this experimental station, WWFD, they had to obtain special permission from the FCC to transmit in this all digital mode. It's called the people who came up with these modes was Ubiquity, now SBE. They call that the MA3 mode. The MA3 mode is the all digital mode. The MA1 is the hybrid mode. I have to give them some names, so here we go. And Dave Colasar is the engineer who's been responsible for pushing this forward at WWFD in Fredericksburg, Maryland. And I was able to talk to Dave a couple of times the past year. You mentioned you heard it in September. Did you hear it at the NAB radio show in Dallas?
No, actually, I heard it. I was driving around Washington, D.C. and actually rented it was a 2019 Chrysler that had a modern HD radio in it that did artist experience. So I was driving through New York and Washington and seeing logos and album artwork and able to receive the all digital signal on WWFD and was actually really blown away by it.
It's important to point out that every radio ever made that has HD and has AM, if it has AM and has HD, it will pick up this all digital mode. So there isn't a radio made that has that has HD and has an AM band. Granted, there were a few AM radios made that a few HD radios made that don't have AM. This is little pocket radios, things like that have no place for an antenna. But any car radio made that does HD on the FM band also does it on the AM band, and it will pick up this mode. So that was planned from the beginning. The hybrid mode was never really intended to go on forever and ever. They knew it's pretty rough technical constraints, and it was kind of a rough mode in terms of making interference to other people and to your own signal on certain wideband AM radios. And so it was tough. And my hat's off to the people who tried it, made it work. And then in many cases, the decision was made, let's turn that off. It's not gaining us anything. But
yeah, I wonder too I wonder too, because a lot of them were also doing first and second generation equipment too, that may have played into it. And so I wonder, if we fast forward to today, I haven't personally done any AM HD engineering with modern equipment, but I wonder how much of that would be different.
It could be better. And back then, 15 years ago or more, there were more tube type transmitters. There were the solid state transmitters were of some previous design, so it may work better now. But it's worthwhile to point out, and I'm back to Dave Colasar, who's pushed this thing forward. He did a demo with SBE at the NAB radio show in Dallas last year, and they had actually an RF recording. They had an RF recording of the band, and they were able to play that RF recording into the radio in a car on the show floor and let us hear exactly what that would sound like. And it was pretty, it was, let's just say it was impressive for AM, right? And one of the things I would relate it to is if you've got a cell phone and nowadays many, many more cell phones offer something called HD voice, and many, many more business phone systems. When I call one of my colleagues at the Telos Alliance, or when I talk to my wife on my cell phone, typically we're getting HD voice. Now, HD voice isn't high fidelity, but you know what? It's so much better than a POTS line that you go, wow, this sounds pretty good. And it's really a similar experience for the all digital AM HD. This all digital mode, you get more bit rate. I want to say you get about 40 kilobits per second with this all digital mode. And Dave Colasar, does the processing correctly, so it's not just crazy overdone. It's there all the time. It's properly lifted, and you have a good volume all the time, and it's actually fairly pleasant to listen to. Is it CD quality? No, but is it better than AM? Oh my goodness, way better than what AM has become. I should point out, as engineers, we all know that AM can be high fidelity. It just can't do it in the current practical environment that we live in, with the constraints of our bandwidth that we're forced to be in, 9.5 kilohertz, the NRSC curve, and the progression of the how AM receivers have gone downhill, and AM transmission has, we tried to overcome some of those things. So yes, it's been a difficult fight over the last 40 years to maintain AM quality, and a lot of times it hasn't been.
It's interesting you say that, because you go back 15, 20 years, and there was all that big news that one of the big broadcasters said, okay, you know what, just take your bandwidth down to 5 kilohertz because nobody's hearing it anyway, and how big of a to-do that was. And a lot of that was done because a lot of radios aren't hearing that bandwidth anyway. So, if we can do better and make ourselves more compatible or more competitive, then why don't we do that? So that's been a debate for quite a while.
One of the things, and we'll get back to the filing here, but I'm just setting this up to see what are the advantages here. Is this a further science experiment? Or are there real benefits here? And one of the extreme benefits that I saw at the NAB radio show, and talked to Dave Kaldesar later on my own podcast, This Week in Radio Tech, was this. The car radio's visual interface did not differentiate between an AM HD station and an FM HD station and Sirius XM and Spotify. They were all on an equal playing field. So if you had scanned and gotten an AM HD station, it was there with a logo, and it looked just as important as everything else on there. And when you touched it, you got there was, by the way, with AM HD, with this MA3 mode, there's not a long delay in picking up the AM. It picks it up in a lower quality almost instantly, within a second or so, and then within a couple, 3 more seconds, you get the full bandwidth, even with all the redundancy that's in the data. So, Kevin, what about you? I think that's to have equal par with your logos, your icons on the screen of modern cars, that seems like a real benefit.
Oh, 100%. I mean, radio, that's the experience that people have come to expect these days, that if they're listening to Sirius XM, if they're listening to Spotify on their phones, they're going to get artist title information. They're going to see album covers. This is the experience that they're coming to expect. And radio can deliver those things if you have the right tools. And I'm all for keeping us as competitive as possible. And personally, I think AMHD, the all AMHD, I think is great. I think it really gives stations that want to do this in competitive edge. And, Xperi loves to tout the number of vehicles that now have HD as a standard. And just anecdotally, my own personal experience doing car shopping over the last few years, I'm really amazed at how many cars come with HD radio as a standard option. And that's not just Lexuses, that's not BMWs, that's Chevys, that's Hyundais. These are cars everyday people are buying, and they're able to hear the HD experience. And so if we're able to put a competitive signal like that into somebody's car and they're able to hear it, so we're putting a competitive signal where people are doing a lot of their listening and people are able to hear it in 2020 with a lot of modern vehicles having that standard, it makes some sense to do it, particularly if you've got a station that's not doing well or you're trying to keep it competitive. I can see this as a very viable option.
In a few moments, I want to read over another point that was made in the SBE's filing, but there's one objection that comes to light quite often, and that is, well, if you go all digital, you've just obsoleted every analog AM radio in your coverage area, every single one of them. Now, I'll grant you that there are stations and areas and locations where that would be devastating. And an example, I am part owner of a very rural Mississippi gospel radio station in a county where and I realize it's just diary returns. It's a very small amount of in-tab, but it's the #1 station, and it's a daytimer. Yeah, we have a couple of watts of nighttime power, but it's a daytime black gospel AM radio station. It's the #1 in the county, and every single person listening to it is listening on analog AM radio. And except for a few new cars in that market, and there are plenty that are not new in that market. In other words, it would be foolishness for that station to convert to an all-digital mode. We would lose 99% of all the listeners. However, in markets where you have a much higher penetration of new vehicles, and you've got an audience that has largely, if not almost completely, moved away from the AM band anyway, what would it hurt you to go all digital and be able to be on an audio and interference par with other stations, with your AM station, with, let's say that your market has 35 or 40 or 45% penetration of HD radios. Now, if you got 95% of people not willing to hit that AM button anyway, what do you have to lose to transmit all digital and maybe get some of those people back? Kevin, what do you think?
You're absolutely right. And that's why we support especially the volunteer basis.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody's going to require this to happen anytime soon, because why? And for exactly your point, you've got a station that does exceptionally well as is, and why would you change that? You know, the whole mandate for us is to serve the public interest, and the FCC really specifies, and this has always been our mandate, is that we are very community driven. We serve the communities that we serve. And if we serve those communities with an analog daytimer, God love you. I mean, that's still the testament to what radio can do for us in this modern era. But if you're Hubbard and you've got a station that's on the outskirts of a major market, and you can kind of play with it a little bit and see how things go, why wouldn't you? I mean, you're absolutely right. That is a perfect opportunity for something just like that to give it some legs, to give it a chance in 2020 to be on par with everybody else.
Good point. Good point. And I want to, we're going to take a quick break, and then I want to come back and talk about a few of the technical advantages that SBE recognizes in all digital AM service. So we'll do that. You are watching or listening to the SBE WEBxtra for the month of March 2020. And I want to turn it back over to Chris Scherer, Communications Director at the SBE. Chris?
Thanks, Kirk. By the way, if you'd like to read the SBE's filing to the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, its comments, if you go to the SBE website, on the top, there's a red navigation bar, and one of those choices is legislative/advocacy. If you hover over that, you'll get a drop down, and SBE's filings with the FCC is one of the choices. If you click, it'll also pop up, but that's a quick and dirty way to access the filing that's been put on record with the FCC. That said, the SBE WEBxtra is made possible by the generous support of our sponsor, Wheatstone, and the SBE WEBxtra will be right back.
Hello, I'm Jay Tyler of the Wheatstone Corporation, and today we're going to talk about expanding your AOIP system outside your current manufacturer. If you're an existing AOIP customer and you want to take advantage of some other features or applications by a third-party manufacturer, you most likely are going to use an AES67 interface. To do this, you're probably going to need a master clock to keep the entire facility synced together. After that, you're going to want to pick the devices that will currently operate within your multicast range for AES67. If you're not sure of that, please contact your manufacturer to make sure they're going to be compatible. After that, you're going to want to make a detailed list of all your multicast addresses to and from the system. That will eliminate any overlapping that could take place. Please get in touch with your AOIP provider and make sure that you can implement AES67 successfully into your existing system.
All right. Well, once again, we want to thank Wheatstone for sponsoring the SBE WEBxtra. By watching this webcast, you earned 1/2 of an SBE recertification point in Category G when you recertify. Let's get back to talking about AM digital radio with Kirk Harnack and Kevin Trueblood.
So, Kevin and audience, maybe it's been a while since you've looked at what the digital mode of AM can do with HD radio. And so point number 4 in the SBE's filing, our comment filing, says this: SBE concurs with the Commission's view that all digital AM broadcasting can offer improved reliability and enhanced audio quality over analog emissions, and that it avoids or minimizes some of the issues inherent in analog emission mode. AM stations using an all-digital signal can transmit ancillary information, placing them on a par in terms of flexibility with FM digital and satellite DAB service. It makes music formats possible, and reportedly, all digital is robust enough to approximate signal coverage areas of analog AM stations. Further, the SBE also agrees that a single technical standard should be mandated because to let the marketplace make the determination of a necessarily uniform broadcast technical standard of this nature has proven unworkable in past similar contexts, and it would be self-defeating now. And that right there speaks to the position of some people, and I have been one in the past saying, why don't we allow DRM? Why not allow that standard in the U.S.? So, Kevin, maybe you can speak a bit to this enhanced audio quality and coverage at least as good as the analog signal.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that, because I just got an email right before we started this from somebody who said, I can't watch this, but asking that same question, are we going to, if we're talking about all digital AM, is DRM part of that conversation? And the answer is no, it's not. And I think it's in large part, like you had said, because as broadcasters, we have to pick a standard. And thus far, we have increasingly chosen Ubiquity and IBOC for the standard for how we're doing digital broadcasts. So now you're talking about, yes, there are tuners in existence for DRM, and we could get them over in the US. But now you're talking about retraining your listeners and talking about reprogramming all of this at a time where it's already hard enough to be competitive. So you're doing this to kind of be on par with everybody else. And again, the standard already exists. So let's just commit to that. I'm not going to say one way or the other if it's the best or what, but that's the standard we've gone with. So that's the one we have to go. That's where we have to go, and that's what we need to go with. Now, as far as the quality goes, we talked about this earlier, that the quality is, light years ahead of what you could enjoy on analog AM. And the fact that it overcomes a lot of the skywave interference, it overcomes a lot of the noise that you hear on the band. So as you drive past a power line, you hear that, the digital broadcast really takes that out. It really smooths a lot of things out for you. And because it's a digital broadcast, much like we do with FM, we're able to cover a lot more ground with a lot less power. And so if you're a highly directional 4-tower, 1 kilowatt station, you may be looking at being able to drop 3 of the towers, do 250 watts with a digital broadcast and cover the same amount of territory. So for broadcasters, there may be a lot of economical advantages to doing it, because you're able to, again, consolidate things. We're already seeing with AM stations, they're starting to diplex more because they're selling off real estate. So they're putting more and more stations on one tower. And if you can convert them to digital, it may make a great deal of economical sense, in addition to keeping them competitive, as we talked about, with being able to do the ancillary data with the enhanced audio quality and able to overcome a lot of the things, a lot of the signature things that we've come to know the AM band for, and being able to hear thunderstorms at night or during the day and things like that. So there's a lot of great technical advantages for it.
The fifth item in our filing is that the SBE is impressed. I want to point out, this isn't just a science experiment. This has been ongoing on the air for some time now. And so we have real world data on what is an all digital AM station like in terms of its coverage and other benefits. SBE is impressed with the results of the NAB Labs all digital AM test project, and with analysis of the results of the experiments conducted at WWFD. This experience would indicate that all digital AM broadcasting will improve audio quality in a difficult RF environment. It's obvious that auxiliary data capability enabled by an all digital system should attract some listeners to AM. So you get title artist, you can get album artwork, and you can get other information up on the screen, just like RDS with FM, and maybe even a bit more than that. Some of the drawbacks, however, are equally manifest. So here we cover some of the drawbacks. The interference potential of a high-powered all-digital station to a low-powered analog AM station is not firmly determined. So let's say, right here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I am, I'm just a few miles from the big air castle of the South, WSM AM. It's 50,000 watts. They have that iconic Blaw-Knox tower. It's on the interstate, just literally 4 or 5 miles from my house. And I got to tell you, it's hard to receive that at some places in my own house because of man-made interference. I've got wall warts and line lumps everywhere, and so do many houses. So it can be a problem to pick up even a 50,000 watt AM station a few miles from the transmitter site. What would be the effect if WSM went the all digital mode And there was some station, an adjacent channel station on 640 or maybe on 660 that you were trying to listen to, even within the coverage area of a lower power station, maybe a 500-watt daytimer or something. What would that do? And that is our filing says that's really unknown at this time. And to help mitigate possible problems, what we're asking for, the SBE urges prior notification. The FCC is asking for 10 days. The SBE says, let's make that 60 days prior notification in order to permit local co-channel and adjacent channel analog stations to determine certain baseline data before the notifying station begins all digital. So that just says that, hey, if you're a radio station on 1380 and you've got neighbors, dozens of miles or 100 miles away on adjacent channels, notify them for 60 days. And that gives them time to maybe go out and check reception in various areas that they haven't been to lately, see how it is, and maybe even record that. And then I guess compare that after the station that wants to go all digital goes all digital. Kevin, is that kind of what you read into our feelings about that?
Yeah, very much so. And it makes a lot of sense because for exactly the reasons you mentioned, because you want to be able to give stations a heads up that may be impacted by it because this is new territory, because if you're going to crank out 50,000 watts of digital power, it may cover substantially more area than what was originally intended. If you look at those contours, that's what our current rules, all of our current allocations are all built around. And if that's going to change, which a lot of the research indicates that it does actually change your coverage area, and for better, usually for the better, it would make a lot of sense to let other stations know this is what we're going to be doing, and so they have a chance to deal with it.
Yep. Let's since a fair amount of our filing does talk maybe a bit disparagingly about the rise in AM noise. And I've been hearing about this for years. In fact, our good friend Chuck Kelly did a paper on this that he presented at several conferences about the incredible rise in the noise floor that occurs in the medium wave bands, including the AM band. You can drive around and hear problems with power lines buzzing. The power companies got to be losing some power there if there's some mild arcing going on or whatever it may be. And then there's the plethora of wall warts that have really cheapo, $2 at retail price power supplies in them, and these are switch mode. They're operating with a buzzy circuit that throws noise into the AM band. And then there's fluorescent lights, there's LED lights and their power supplies. Mm-hmm. There's all these computer monitors we have. And these were all supposed to be regulated under Part 15 and some under Part 18 of the FCC's rules. And yet, except for just a few cases of catching something in a customs warehouse, there's been no real enforcement of this, and it's been to the entire detriment of the usability of the medium wave bands. Kevin, what are your comments about that, and do we have any hope?
You hit the bulk of what a lot of our filing deals with, and to note that we've been very consistent about that since the very first filing we did about AM revitalization several years ago, which is, look, these are all great. We're talking FM translators. We're talking about relaxing certain interference rules. Let's raise power levels. Let's do all these things. All of that is great, but none of it actually, it's all working around the problem. It's all not addressing the underlying problem, which is just that, Part 15 compliance. And the FCC has shown that they're going to allow more and more unlicensed devices. They're not enforcing things on power supplies and light bulbs and things like that. So we're seeing a rise in the noise floor that is just not getting addressed. And the argument is, look, if we're all about AM revitalization, and if that's what the FCC really wants to focus on, we've heard Ajit Pai at NAB say, like, I grew up with AM radio and I love the band and I want to do what I can to save it. Well, this is all great. Everything that you've done so far is great, but it's still not it's still not addressing the underlying problem. And every action that you've taken to date only seems to worsen it. And so that's kind of the question we have is like, look, again, we applaud all of these things. If we want to do all digital, if we want to do FM translators, that's great. But let's also try and fix the band and try and actually make the analog, your analog daytimer in Mississippi, be that much more viable, be able to hear it. In fact, there was what we cited was the engineering group LBA did a study that showed that on modern car radios, a 50,000 watt station on a car radio has difficulty 5 miles away. I mean, 50,000 watt station, back 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you could hear those over most of the United States. And now you can't hear them 5 miles away. There's something wrong there. And if our intent, if our licenses are there to serve the public interest, how do we serve the public interest if every rulemaking you do is a detriment to it? And so that's kind of, we understand that, we're fighting a difficult battle, and we understand that there's a lot at stake. And, how do you regulate all of these cheap products coming in through all these different websites? It's tough. And particularly the FCC has reduced staff, has changed priorities. We get all that, but it wouldn't be responsible of us as an engineering organization to not point that out in the filing. And that's exactly why we took the bulk of this filing to say those things.
As broadcast engineers, radio station owners, broadcast enthusiasts, it's easy for us to lament cheap wall warts, power supplies, and all the things that make noise. It's really easy for us to I won't say fall into that. I mean, it's what we should do. We should lament that. On the other hand, what if the cost of making a wall wart or other power supply or LED lighting fixture or monitor, what if the cost for what is now literally a $2, $3, $4 wall wart, what if that then became $12 or $13 because of good shielding and better design? What if that was the case? Multiply that by every wall wart that's ever been sold in the U.S., and you end up with literally billions of dollars. And it almost seems like on a macro scale, a trade-off between, do we want a cheap way to charge our phone and to light our house? I've got LED lighting throughout my house. Do we want a cheap way to do that, or do we want to save the AM band? And I'm not sure that we as broadcasters with our great memories and rose-colored glasses and desire to have it continue, and I sure do, I'm just not sure it's a winning battle over the next 10, 20, 30 years or so. Now, if we came up with newer technologies that would solve this at no increase in price, then maybe there's a chance. But you still got to get rid of billions of wall warts. And I keep blaming them. I know there's other things as well, but that's one of the. I say that because as a ham radio operator, sometimes I've looked for interference in my own house, and oh my gosh, it's that wall wart from brother or whomever that is just screwing up my reception of ham radio. I don't know. I'm not sure it's going digital is a means to get out of the interference situation. You do reach an interference situation where the digital can't work anymore. So you're kind of kicking the can down the road with a better technology that isn't 100%, isn't in real time. That's not the right word. It isn't bothersome until it goes away, until the signal goes away. Kevin, do you want to prognosticate any about what may be our future for this kind of interference? Because I'm not betting on mitigation.
I mean,
myself.
Yeah, everything you said, you're not wrong. And I think that is the reality of what we're dealing with is that there is just this inundation and an inability to keep up with it, whether it's economically to do Part 15 enforcement, because people need cheap light bulbs. We need to have power infrastructure wired everywhere. But at the same time, there are already rules on existence governing these things. And if they're going to choose to not enforce that, then we at least need to point out to say, hey, again, you're not enforcing these rules. We understand people need cheap light bulbs. We understand wall warts need to be manufactured as inexpensively as possible. These are all the realities of it. And it is a give and take. And and the eventual point, just like you said, is all digital AM may very well be kicking the can down the road. But if these noise issues aren't addressed, then all digital AM is going to be meaningless because it's just going to be, you won't be able to hear the signal one way or the other. So again, that doesn't mean we're against it. Absolutely. Let's do it. If you want to do all digital AM, please, by all means, it's great. However, we still need to point out that there is a lack of enforcement for what's really causing the problems of the band and causing a great deal of this revitalization in the first place.
And I'm not for a moment saying that we shouldn't fight for our right to party, fight for doing things right. But there's all kinds of technologies and innovations that come along that screw up something else. For example, I've heard that all these low Earth orbit satellites that are making internet available, are going to make internet available around the world, high-speed bandwidth, 5G type connections, lots and lots of bandwidth available to us, perhaps at low prices. They're messing with astronomy, because now you've got all these objects floating overhead that reflect light that make it hard for people to see what they want to see in the heavens. So what if the next big innovation was absolutely amazing and would bring, all kinds of benefits to people all around the world? Its only drawback, it completely obliterated the FM band. I mean, what if,
but that's a good question.
To this.
I think what the FCC's emphasis has been, and this isn't necessarily their own doing, there's been a lot of political pressure to the organization to roll out 5G and to expand broadband, because they see that as being a fundamental thing in this country. We're behind in a lot of other countries in rolling out broadband and making 5G available. So that's been the pressure. And that's why we're seeing the television repack. That's why we're seeing a potential C-band repack. That's kind of the direction they want to take everybody, is to shift to online. And obviously we still have the mandate to, as licensees of the public interest, to still continue to do those things. But we're definitely seeing an emphasis on, but here's this internet, and maybe all this stuff can just start migrating towards the internet.
And we kind of hate to put all our eggs in that basket too, because there's benefits to diversity of communication. Ask any ham radio operator during an emergency. There's benefits to not having one infrastructure. So Kevin, it's been enlightening. I'm glad to learn about this filing. I agree with what we're saying in it, certainly, and it's filed on behalf of our 5,000 SBE members. So good work there. And I hope the FCC takes to heart some or all of what we've said. So,
well, we sure can hope. We sure can hope.
Thank you in your role as chair of the Government Relations Committee. I'm sure that can be frustrating sometimes, but also you do your best to lobby and give our opinion to the people in power who make the rules.
Well, it's an interesting time to be doing that. Between this and other things that are going on, we're staying busy.
Kevin Trueblood, thank you so much for being with us. Chris Scherer is here as well to wrap things up and take us out. Chris?
Well, I think you just identified, we can't have nice things, Kirk. It's all comes down to that.
Yes, you could be right.
So, yes, you've been watching the SBE WEBxtra. Thanks again for tuning in with us. This episode will be available on demand on the SBE YouTube channel. And by watching this webcast, you just earned 1/2 of the SBE recertification point when you recertify. Once again, we thank our sponsor, Wheatstone, for supporting the SBE WEBxtra. Watch for the announcement of our next installment, the chapter of the web, the SBE WEBxtra, next month. On behalf of Kirk Harnack, I'm Chris Scherer, SBE Member Communications Director. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.